Hello, and thanks for watching one more video from the Ketogenic Fasting Project. Today I'm talking about carbohydrates, or what I like to call the high carbohydrate constellation. As I've mentioned before, a lot of people believe that if we didn't have a lot of concentrated carbohydrates in our diet, we probably wouldn't suffer from most of the modern maladies. But because we've been exposed to them for many decades, and we're seeing the end results in the form of what are known as modern diseases. So I wanted to kind of run through an overview of them so that it kind of puts things in perspective as a health crisis at large. When you're exposed to carbohydrates frequently, your blood sugar is elevated, and so then your insulin is elevated. And people often have fatty liver syndrome. It's actually one of the most common diseases in the world, but it doesn't necessarily affect people that in a noticeable way until they get older. And of course, when your insulin level is high, you tend to get insulin resistance, which in turn often triggers leptin resistance. And then our bodies are full of what are called glycated end products, or A.G.E.s. And this is actually a byproduct of carbohydrates sort of attaching themselves to proteins in the body and sort of damaging the proteins. And of course, we're all familiar with the idea that we're accumulating body fat. Now, this isn't just happening in the United States or Canada or Holland or something like that. The situation in the United States is actually sort of representative of what's happening to most of the world, because even countries like China have more than half the population that has high blood sugar and is pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, and it's basically the same thing in the United States. And on a global level, they're saying that it's the same story. Over half the population of the planet is pre-diabetic or full-blown type 2 diabetic. You might notice early on, and anywhere where people are on a high carbohydrate diet, especially refined carbohydrates like flour and sugar, that people typically experience a lot more mood swings. And this is in part because their blood sugar is going up and down. When you feel hungry and tired and weak, that's a symptom of low blood sugar. And that's because you feel your blood sugar fluctuating. If you had nice steady blood sugar all the time, you wouldn't feel that effect. But I'm sure most people are familiar with the concept of feeling low blood sugar. And of course, tooth decay, I like to liken it to the canary in the coal mine, and I think other people have referenced it that way as well, that it's very common for young people, children, to get cavities in their teeth, and that's almost exclusively caused by eating sugar and the bacteria that it feeds. But there's also some research that shows eating certain types of grains is bad for your teeth. I'm trying to remember there was something else that's really bad for your teeth that I read about recently, but I'll have to cover that another time. People tend not to sleep as deeply, you get that shallow sleep, so people aren't as well rested. Maybe that's because their blood sugar is fluctuating, or maybe that's because of indigestion or some other reason. The brain activity is disturbed by the overconsumption of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are also associated with cravings because, unlike with fat and protein, when the microbiome that digests the carbohydrates for you runs out of carbohydrates, it's signaling for more. It's actually sending chemical messages to your brain saying, hey, we ran out of carbs down here, go ahead and go eat some more carbs and send them on down. And that is what contributes to people's cravings. People also tend to have lower endurance. Metabolizing carbohydrates tends to generate more free radicals or oxidized material, which has to be dealt with. And of course, you can only store a couple thousand calories worth of glucose in your blood. And you can store some glycogen in your muscle and all that, but it gets used up pretty quickly. So then you need to feed again, right? Acne is also being related to um, carbohydrate consumption. I knew some people that immigrated from Eastern Europe, and they said when they were kids they'd never seen anybody with acne, and then they moved to the United States a long time ago, and they're like, "Well, what's wrong with all these kids?" And more research is pointing to that being related to just eating too much sugar. So more and more research is pointing that uh, high carbohydrate diets tend to worsen learning disabilities. And it's no surprise, I don't think, to anyone that if the carbohydrates aren't really fueling your brain effectively and your blood sugar is going up and down, people are just going to struggle with especially cognitive disabilities even more because their brain is just not able to function at its full capacity. Of course, most people have heard about metabolic syndrome, which is kind of a constellation in its own. Almost anything that's a syndrome is a collection of different types of symptoms. So, metabolic syndrome kind of encompasses, being overweight, having insulin resistance, and so on and so forth. And it's easily recognized by large waist sizes. Something I struggled with myself. There's some formulas. It's generally accepted that your waist circumference should be half or less than half of your height. So if you're 70 inches tall, your waistline in theory should be 35 inches or less. And then another thing you might notice, a lot of people have really thick calves, real fleshy lower sections of the leg, and they're easy to put a dimple in. Pitting edema is a pretty common symptom. Just walk around anywhere where you can. Well, and some people unfortunately can't even get their legs into pants. It's terrible. So, and then there's all kinds of autoimmune diseases and allergies and hay fever and everything. I know personally that was one of the first things I noticed when I started going low carb keto, zero carb. So the allergies just started going away. The only thing I really have left is some psoriasis. So I'm documenting that and seeing if zero carb, which is pretty much the ultimate elimination diet, is gonna resolve that. So. And then brain fog. Lots of people talk about brain fog. They wake up in the morning, they got really bad brain fog. They have a tough time shaking it. They have it after lunch, or randomly. It's just like, oh God, I can't quite focus. I can't remember quite. Okay, a lot of that related to the overconsumption of carbohydrates. Dry skin and dandruff often related to uh, not eating enough fat and eating too many carbohydrates. Um, Frequently being hungry, kind of synonymous with cravings, kind of synonymous with your blood sugar going up and down. And then high blood pressure or hypertension. I was shocked when I was in my 30s and I found out how many of my friends had high blood pressure in their 30s. I was like, what is going on here? And again, associated with the consumption of a lot of carbohydrates, the retention of sodium and water to keep everything in balance. When you go low carb, zero carb, ketogenic, whatever, you tend to lose a lot of water and sodium, and blood pressure tends to drop very quickly. A lot of people manage their high blood pressure with these low carb or zero carb diets or fasting. So it's very simple, very effective. Just already talked about sodium water retention being related to it and causing hypertension. And of course, just carrying around a lot of extra water, which, looks like you're just carrying around a lot of extra fat, and it probably has about the same impact on you. And of course, type 2 diabetes being one of the big fish, if you take diabetes and all the associated medical issues with it, it's about 75% of what is spent on modern medicine goes to that. I think last estimate I heard it was over $400 billion just in the United States. And like I was reading an article the other day that the average cost of taking care of a severe diabetic wound on a foot is, like $21,000 or something insane like that. So, you can imagine those costs add up. And a lot of people in the keto, low carb, zero carb world look at type 2 diabetes as the low hanging fruit. It's one of the easiest things to resolve. And another thing I probably forgot to put in here was seizures. A lot of people have different types of seizures, get a lot of relief from a ketogenic diet, a high fat, low carb diet. And of course, that's kind of bleeding over into schizophrenia research and a few other of the very common mental disorders. They're finding that people on high fat, low carb diets do much better, and their symptoms are managed much easier. They need less medication. And then, of course, heart disease. The low carb spectrum of diets tends to be anti-inflammatory, or reduces inflammation instead of causing inflammation, and that helps resolve plaque accumulation in the arteries, particularly the coronary arteries and the large veins in the legs, and of course the large veins in the neck. So this is another thing. If you're on a high carbohydrate diet and it's high, the carbohydrate consumption is high enough to cause inflammation in the arteries or the joints or whatever, you're just going to accelerate disease, and that's where we get heart disease and arthritis and a lot of allergies. And also high carbohydrate and refined carbohydrate diets are associated with all sorts of indigestion. They can be the direct cause of things like heartburn and GERD, and of course gas. And a lot of people who have Crohn's disease or the other bowel diseases find a great deal of relief in these types of diets. So if you join groups online, you'll find, roughly half the people in there are just for weight loss, and the other half wound up there because they have some sort of chronic disease like Crohn's disease, or I can't remember the other one. There's a couple more of those real common digestive diseases that they met somebody who's like, oh yeah, mine went away after 20 years of battling it. And a lot of these people have bowel sections and all kinds of stuff, and they just can't manage it with medication or whatever, and they wind up trying a low carb or a ketogenic diet, and it goes away. So you imagine having surgery, some people more than once, just to remove sections of their bowel because it's inflamed. I mean, that's scary stuff. As health deteriorates to manage all these problems, whether it's type 2 diabetes or arthritis or autoimmune, you wind up taking more medications, which oftentimes cause more problems that require more medication. So, I'd like to encourage people to, even if it's not a low carb, zero carb, ketogenic diet or something like that, to look into diets that can improve their chronic conditions before they rely too heavily on medications. And some medications just lose their effect over time, or you just have to keep increasing the dosage, or you have to add more medications to enhance medications you're already taking. So the digestive tract is where most of your immune system is centered. So a lot of that microbiome in there that breaks down food for you is also generating components for your immune system. So you need your immune system for everything, right? You got to fight bacteria, viruses, funguses, cancer cells, all kinds of stuff. So if you have to take medication, oftentimes medications will be very hard on the digestive tract, and in the end, it impairs your immune system. And this might very well be the case with taking acid blockers or proton inhibitors, and certainly the NSAIDs are known for causing perforations and stuff like that. So, and I think everybody knows that you take too much aspirin, you can cause abdominal bleeding and stuff like that. So, just something, if you could eat you could eat steak instead of taking medication, you might want to consider it. So I'm just saying, look into it. Of course, your sleep quality can improve I mean, we all remember when we were babies or little kids or whatever, we could fall asleep real easily. We could sleep real soundly generally. Your parents could pick you up and move you around. You fall asleep in the car. They pick you up out of the car, take you in the house, put you in bed, and you don't remember any of it. Now try doing that as an adult. Well, you can get much better quality sleep and much deeper sleep and much more restorative sleep on a better diet, believe it or not. So the glycated proteins is related to the A.G.E.s that I talked about earlier, and one of the problems is the proteins can cause dysfunctional cells or cell death because they no longer operate correctly. So they don't do what they're supposed to be, which of course is this kind of damage to the overall system, and it could affect just about any part of your body. And that's kind of what happens when you look at all the diseases that are associated with type 2 diabetes. Most people with type 2 diabetes die of heart disease, but along the way they have to have amputations, they suffer from neuropathy, they go blind, all kinds of horrible things. So something to consider, that just lowering your blood sugar without medication can greatly extend your life and greatly improve its quality. So, and of course, if you're overweight, you don't feel good, you got arthritis, you're not able to move around as much. You're not able to move around as much. It can accelerate your demise. Accelerate your decrepitude. With a weak immune system, anything can happen, right? And then, of course, it's very common for people's hormones to get out of whack. I've talked about testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, but your thyroid hormone as well. I believe that one of the problems that starts happening is T3 is not as easily converted into T4, and now it's a real problem. And this, of course, hyperinsulinemia is the presence of excessive insulin in your blood. So and it's an excessive amount of insulin, which is a hormone, a master hormone that has many functions. And it's good to have insulin, but you don't want to have too much of it too often. In itself is a massive part of this high carbohydrate constellation. It has impacts all over the body. Not the least of which are things like inflammation, cancer, and overall hormone dysregulation. Something like progesterone might drop off and then estrogen increases, or testosterone decreases and estrogen increases. So those are very common diseases that we see as people get older, and they're most likely related to the excessive consumption of carbohydrates, or at least refined carbohydrates. And something that might very well be resolved or reversed or at least improved by a low carbohydrate, high fat diet, a ketogenic diet, a zero carb diet, or even a Whole30 diet, which isn't even near as restrictive. So anyways, I'd like to thank everybody for listening, and I ask you to subscribe and share these videos. Keep learning, stay curious, stay motivated, and keep trying. Just don't give up.